All right, folks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's Dr. Kaz, and I am going to be discussing the male reproductive system today. So we just wrapped up with the female reproductive system, and so now we have to talk about the other half, and that's the male reproductive system. So a couple things that we're going to go over. All right, we discussed how the primary reproductive organ in the female, right, we were dealing with the ovaries. Well, here in the male, we are going to be talking about the testes. And then, of course, we have the accessory reproductive organs that go along with that, right? That's the penis, and then all the tubing and ducts that attach the testes to the penis. And of course, we do have some accessory glands that we will discuss in this chapter. So let's start off here talking about the testes, and then we'll get into the formation, creation of sperm through the process of spermatogenesis. All right, so the testes are an outside the body organ. They live in the scrotum, all right, down in the groin area of the male. And this is where the sperm is going to be produced, and the male sex hormones, the androgens, will be produced there. So one thing you have to understand is that the testes start off inside the male, and then as that male is developing, okay, inside of mommy, all right, the testes descend out of the abdomen and move out of the body of the male and into the scrotum. As it does that, all right, those organs are going to push through some other tissues. And that's why in the scrotum there, the testes are covered on the front, on the anterior surface, and on the lateral surface by the serous membrane that was found, all right, inside the peritoneum there. All right, so this tunica vaginalis is what the serous membrane is called. It originally comes from the peritoneum found in the male's abdomen there. And so there's two layers, as we know with all serous membranes. There's a parietal layer, right, and a visceral layer. The visceral layer is going to cover the viscera. In this case, that'll be the testes, and the outer layer will be the parietal layer. And then there is a small cavity found in between those two layers, and it too is filled with that serous fluid there. Okay, so if we also take a closer examination here of the testes, we'll see there's going to be this white kind of fibrous tissue that covers the testicle. And that is called the Tunica Albigenia. All right, think of an albino, albigenia is white. And so this layer is going to be deep to the tunica vaginalis, right below the visceral layer. And so also in the Tunica Albigenia, we'll see this region here where there's a thickening that is going to be located on the underside of the the interior portion, right? Because it does project in. And this is where we're going to find a lot of ducts and vessels. So blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, ducts, because we're going to be transitioning the sperm that are going to be leaving the testicle, then heading to the epididymis, and then eventually out of the scrotum and into the male's body there. All right, so we'll also see some nerves in the mediastinum testa. Now, in the testes themselves, right, we're going to form these small compartments. And in these small compartments, this is where the sperm is going to be generated. So we have these little walls that are forming these compartments. That's the septa. That is going to come off of that inner layer of the Tunica Albigenia. And so roughly each testes is going to be divided up into about 250 tubules. I'll show you on a slide here, a picture of what I'm discussing. So in those lobules, we have the structures called the Seminiferous Tubules. And so again, it's a very crowded area there. So we're going to just try to cram in these tubules so they just go all over the place. Right, so we describe them as being convoluted and elongated because we're just kind of putting them all inside of these septa, right, and those lobules there. And here inside the seminiferous tubules, we'll find, all right, the first of the cells that we're going to discuss, and those are the Suspenticular cells. Right, these are the cells that are going to release the hormone Inhibin. We discussed that when we were going over the female reproductive system, right? And Inhibin is going to decrease the follicle stimulating hormone, FSH, which will help to decrease sperm production here, right? Also, these cells are going to help to take care of and nourish any of the sperm that are forming at this time. All right, so here in these seminiferous tubules, this is where we're going to see, all right, the sperm cells dividing and the development of the sperm cells in their early stages here. So our brain has a blood-brain barrier, all right, the triple B. Well, here in the testes, we have the blood-testis barrier. And this barrier here prevents our own white blood cells from attacking the developing sperm. So it keeps those separate to protect them, right? And this is due to those tight junctions that we saw, those formations that are in between cells. And these tight junctions will be found in between the Suspenticular cells. So in between, all right, these seminiferous tubules will have these spaces. Again, I'll show you on the diagram here in a moment. And in those spaces, all right, we have cells called interstitial cells. Those spaces are the interstitial spaces. And it's these cells that are going to make our male sex hormones, the androgens. Of course, the hormone that stimulates that is the LH hormone, luteinizing hormone, right? And the famous testosterone is one of these androgens that are going to be produced here. Now, of course, we do have, all right, testosterone being produced by the adrenal cortex, but not nearly on the same level as the interstitial cells that are going to be releasing them in the testes here. So if we look at our diagram here now, I can show you all these things that I was just talking about. Right, so here you can see the testicle, and then the outer layer here, all right, that is that serous membrane. So we have the outer layer and an inner layer. So the outer layer is the parietal layer, and we call it the tunica vaginalis. So this is the parietal layer of the tunica vaginalis. Then this other pink line here represents the visceral layer of the tunica vaginalis, and then there's a space here. And then immediately on top of the testicle itself is this white layer, and that's the tunica albigenia. That's deep to the visceral layer of the tunica vaginalis. And so you'll notice the testicle has all these lobules, these compartments here. And inside of these compartments, we have those seminiferous tubules. And this is where the sperm is going to start to divide, and it's going to develop or start the development process in this region here. And so all of these tubules here will dump into this region of the testicle, and that's the mediastinum testes here. So that's going to kind of collect, right, all the sperm, and eventually that will lead us into the epididymis, where the sperm will hang out and grow up a little bit. They'll go through some maturation there. Right, so you can see here is the epididymis. That's that ridge-like structure that sits kind of on top of the testes. It looks like a comma, right, at the far end here, where we have the head of the epididymis. And then as we move further down towards the inferior portion, there's the body of the epididymis, and then the tail. And then coming up the tail, we'll see the beginnings here of the Ductus Deferens, or the vas deferens, which will eventually move itself up into the spermatochord and into the male's body. All right, so since we're talking about the testes and sperm, we need to talk about spermatogenesis. And let's discuss first hormonal regulation. We talked about this a little bit with the female, all right, reproductive system. So let's talk about it with the male reproductive system. The hypothalamus, of course, that is the gland that is going to get this show on the road. And it is going to release GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone, which is going to then stimulate the anterior pituitary to release FSH and LH. Now, FSH and LH are going to now stimulate spermatogenesis with the division of sperm cells, the maturation of sperm cells, and also we are going to see the release of androgens, all right? So the LH is going to be responsible for stimulating our interstitial cells to secrete testosterone. So testosterone and interstitial cells go hand in hand. Whereas the FSH is going to stimulate the Suspenticular cells to secrete this protein called androgen binding protein. And so it binds onto testosterone, and it'll help to maintain high levels of testosterone in the testes there. Oops, it went the wrong way. I apologize about that. So now that we have this elevated testosterone, now we can get our sperm here through the process of spermatogenesis. We can start to get the production of sperm going here. So because of the increased testosterone levels, we'll see a negative feedback effect on gonadotropin releasing hormone on the hypothalamus. And therefore, it's going to then also cause the anterior pituitary to have a decreased sensitivity to any GnRH being produced by the hypothalamus. Whereas the Suspenticular cells, all right, we talked about this with Inhibin, all right, the Inhibin helps to maintain or limit, all right, our sperm count. So as the sperm count starts to rise, we'll see the release of Inhibin, and that will inhibit follicle stimulating hormone from being released from the anterior pituitary. So again, we see another negative feedback mechanism. So the outcome with negative feedback mechanisms will always be in the opposite direction of whatever the stimulus is. Keep that in mind. So in the last part here of the hormonal regulation, we're going to see testosterone, right, having an effect on stimulating the male's sex drive, their libido, and also the development of any secondary sexual characteristics. So a thickening of the vocal cords, causing a deeper voice, the growth of facial hair, and then the growth of hair in the pubic and axillary or armpit regions there. So if you know this slide here, you'll do pretty well in understanding hormonal regulation for spermatogenesis here. So let's kind of work through this here just for a few moments, because now you can see in picture form what I was talking about just a moment ago. So here we are in the hypothalamus releasing the gonadotropin releasing hormone that is going to stimulate the anterior pituitary to release both FSH and LH. All right, so when LH is being produced, it is going to stimulate the interstitial cells found here in the interstitial space outside the seminiferous tubules here to secrete testosterone. And so that release of testosterone will, one, have an effect on the male's libido, their sex drive. What we'll also see here with the effects of testosterone is that it's going to help with the stimulation of spermatogenesis. And what we'll see is, right, the elevation of testosterone is going to inhibit the release of gonadotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. And at the same time, right, it is going to reduce the sensitivity of the anterior pituitary gland to any gonadotropin releasing hormone that is making its way out of the hypothalamus. So that's what the LH does. All right, so what about FSH? Well, the FSH is going to stimulate the Suspenticular cells here, and they're going to secrete the androgen binding protein, and this too is going to help maintain, through the androgen binding protein here, elevated levels of testosterone, undergoing the effects that I just discussed here. Now, as our sperm levels start to increase, right, what we will see then is the Suspenticular cells are saying, okay, all right, we have enough sperm, let's decrease the production of sperm or halt that. Okay, so it will start to release Inhibin, and then Inhibin then will travel to the anterior pituitary gland, and it will then inhibit the release of FSH. So it will no longer be stimulating, right, the Suspenticular cells there. And so there's your hormonal regulation. So let's move in and talk about, all right, spermatogenesis, and another term here that you haven't heard me discuss, Spermiogenesis. So spermatogenesis, right, you should know the difference here between spermatogenesis and spermiogenesis. Spermatogenesis is the development of sperm. So this all happens within the seminiferous tubule there. And so here's the thing, okay? This will go on, all right, during puberty. And that's because that is when we see an increased release of significant levels of follicle stimulating hormone and LH. Not until puberty. So let's start off and talk about our germ cells for the sperm cells, which are what we call Spermatogonia. And so these cells are diploid cells. And so during, all right, the process here of spermatogenesis, all right, the Spermatogonia are going to divide by mitosis. Notice it's not meiosis, but they divide by mitosis. So now they are going to produce more germ cells, and they are going to produce, our primary spermatocyte. So when we're dealing with the primary spermatocyte, we're now going to undergo that development of that sperm here, which we'll talk about in a moment. But keep that in mind. All right, the spermatogonia are going to divide by mitosis. And so because of that division, we'll have more germ cells or spermatogonium, and we will wind up with some primary spermatocytes. So the primary spermatocyte is a diploid cell that will now undergo meiosis, not mitosis, but meiosis. And so the primary spermatocyte will then develop into our secondary spermatocyte. And so our secondary spermatocyte, as a result of the division here of the primary spermatocyte, where we start up with a diploid cell, now we're going to wind up with two cells, right, that are going to result from that meiotic division, and they're going to be haploid cells. So that means each cell has 43 chromosomes. If you're diploid, you have, just a reminder, 46 chromosomes. Haploid have 23 chromosomes. So now we're going to start to get closer for these spermatocytes, all right, to leave, all right, the seminiferous tubules. So the division, right, spermatogenesis starts off at the periphery, near the walls of the seminiferous tubule. And then they'll start to move towards the center where the lumen is. And as they get closer to the lumen, they become more developed. So after our secondary spermatocytes, after they have resulted, then, right, they're going to undergo, all right, more development and become what we call a spermatotid. And so these secondary spermatocytes will have completed meiosis too. And once they've done that, they are now known as a spermatotid. Again, we are still left with a haploid cell with 23 chromosomes, but they start to edge closer to the lumen there. The closer we get to the lumen, the closer we get to leaving the testicle there. All right, so we talked about spermatogenesis, and now let's discuss spermiogenesis. All right, so once this is the final stage, the last stop here of spermatogenesis, this is when the spermatid is going to mature into spermatozoa and then eventually into sperm. So here, the actual cell goes through some really big structural and appearance changes. Right here at this point, they're going to start to develop this cap over the nucleus. We call that the chromosome cap. Right? And that's an important structure because the journey to the egg is hard enough, but then, right, things don't get easier for the sperm, because then they have to burrow their way into the egg in order for fertilization to occur. So the chromosome cap helps with that because it's covered with these digestive enzymes, and these enzymes will help, all right, the sperm to get through, okay, the oocyte's outer covering there, and it will penetrate into the inner portion of the secondary oocyte. So the sperm nucleus and the oocyte nucleus can fuse together. So here we also will see on the cell a tail. And so that's what the sperm are pretty famous for, is this tail structure. And of course, the tail is made up of these microtubules. As you know, right, a male sperm cell is the only motile cell in the body. It's the only cell that has flagellum on it. And that flagellum is the tail here. And so in the tail, we'll see some mitochondria because, of course, we need mitochondria to produce our ATP, because we need a lot of ATP to move that tail around so the sperm can propel itself towards the egg here. All right, so a couple differences here are between female and male gametogenesis. When we're dealing here with the females, okay, you only have one single oocyte, secondary oocyte, that is produced at the end of gametogenesis for the female. Whereas in the male, you wind up with 4 sperm cells. All right, female oocytes are going to halt meiosis before they're even born. Whereas with males, they're going to start everything at puberty. So spermatogenesis occurs at puberty. It doesn't start before birth. Right? Whereas finally, females are only going to be able to effectively reproduce until they start menopause. Whereas for the most part, males, all right, can reproduce pretty much throughout their adult life. There are men that have fathered or sired children in their 70s, 80s, and I'm sure, I don't know if anyone in their hundreds, but it's possible. All right, so this picture here is just showing you what is going on with spermatogenesis and spermiogenesis. Okay, spermiogenesis is pretty much that last stage here where we're starting off with our spermatid, and then it's going to develop into the actual sperm. So you can see the spermiogenesis here on the right side of our page, and then our spermatogenesis on the left side. And if you notice here on the picture, okay, here's our seminiferous tubule. Now we're going in for a close-up here on the periphery. We're starting off with the primordial cell, the Spermatogonium. It is a diploid cell, 46 chromosomes. It divides, yields 2 primary spermatocytes, excuse me. Again, both diploid. Then now we are going to, that's a mitotic division. Now we're going to enter and engage into, all right, meiosis. And so that primary spermatocyte is going to yield 2 secondary spermatocytes, but they each have half of the chromosome, so 23 and 23. And then those secondary spermatocytes will undergo, all right, meiosis 2, and then they'll yield us 2 more cells. So we have a total of 4 cells from our primordial germ cell here. But again, we're moving towards the center, towards the lumen. And then this is where we're going to start to see the transition from the spermatogenesis to the spermiogenesis, where our spermatotids develop into our actual adult sperm cell. Okay, so when the male, all right, is getting ready to reproduce and they are going to release their sperm from their body, it's not just going to be sperm. We are going to mix it up with the seminal fluid that is going to come, all right, from some of our accessory glands here. And so that together, the seminal fluid and the sperm are what we refer to as semen. Once it is released, all right, during the course of intercourse, all right, we call that ejaculate. Pretty impressive numbers here. 200 to 500 million spermatozoa are going to be released, all right, per ejaculation. And so you might think that that's a lot. It is a lot, okay? But keep in mind, all right, we have to line up, all right, the fertilization time period of the female, all right, with the release of the sperm here at the right time. Otherwise, there's not going to be fertilization of the egg, all right? And we talked about the reasons why. Okay, so it takes about 2 weeks, right, for the sperm to get from the seminiferous tubules to ejaculate. All right, so some of the things that I didn't get a chance to mention, right, that tubular system, the duct system here in the males here, right, we have, right, each testicle has their own set. They don't share with one another. So they're not connected to one another in the scrotum. They are completely separate. The right testis has all its own plumbing, and the left testis has all its own plumbing, right? So the structure here called the ret testi, and I'll show you the ret testi right here. Okay, the ret testi is going to be found in the mediastinum testes here. So the ret testi, oops, right, this again is going to take in all the sperm that has been produced in the seminiferous tubules, and then it is going to transition or transmit that sperm into these structures called the efferent ductules which are going to lead into the epididymis. So these structures are going to be lined by epithelium, specifically simple cuboidal epithelium with these microvilli on top. Those microvilli help to increase the surface area of those cells so we can absorb any fluid that does not need to be present there, keeps the excess fluid from getting too increased. All right, so in the ret testes, we're going to transition the sperm from the seminiferous tubules into the epididymis through the efferent ductules. Now here, right, these cells are ciliated columnar epithelium. At this point, the sperm, they're not motile. They can't move on their own. They haven't developed that ability yet. So the ciliated columnar epithelium is there to help move the sperm towards the epididymis. And we also will see non-ciliated columnar epithelium, again, helping to absorb any excess fluid that was secreted. So all this drains into the epididymis here. And it's here that the sperm are going to mature and then get traction, all right? Meaning they will have the ability for mobility, all right, in this region here. So I already talked about the different parts of the epididymis, right? But something that's really interesting, right? In the epididymis, you have this duct, which is that tubular system there. In the epididymis, it can reach 4 to 5 meters long, right? That's anywhere between 12 to 15 feet. Huge, 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 huge. All right, so these structures are lined by pseudostratified columnar epithelium. All right, but on the tip, we'll have some stereocilia, and that will help move, okay, the sperm, right, throughout the ductual system here of the epididymis. Right, so again, keep in mind, they still haven't gained that ability yet, right, if they haven't developed. So, like I said, here in the epididymis, we're going to store the sperm until they have matured. If ejaculation occurs prematurely before they have matured, then they just won't have the ability to be motile. And that could be a problem if a couple is trying to get pregnant if the sperm hasn't had enough time to mature and develop. Okay, so how do we get the sperm, all right, from the scrotum to the penis? Well, our Ductus Deferens or the vas deferens will help with that. That is that tubular structure that leads from the epididymis up through the spermatic cord back towards the prostate gland, right, near the urinary bladder. So this cord, all right, is going to travel, right, or this tube structure is going to travel in the spermatic cord, and it's going to go through this structure called the inguinal canal, which sits in the crease of your leg. If you were to be sitting, you can see that crease right between your leg and your pelvis. That's generally where the inguinal canal is. And so there's an exit and an entrance in that canal. And so the spermatic cord, right, which contains some blood vessels, right, and it also contains the Ductus Deferens, right, it is going to be that conduit there, right, that allows, right, the pelvic cavity, right, to connect to the scrotum there. So the Ductus Deferens will travel up through the spermatic cord into the pelvic cavity. It will move posteriorly in the pelvic cavity along the top portion of the urinary bladder. So off to the side, so the superior lateral surface of the urinary bladder. And it'll travel along that top portion and then come around and wrap around the back posterior surface of the bladder, and it'll meet up with the prostate gland. Right. You'll see this in this swelling, okay, just before, right, the Ductus Deferens is going to meet up, and that swelling is called the ampulla. And that's where we're going to talk about this structure here called the seminal vesicle. I'll show you a picture here. All right, so our ductus deferens has 3 layers to it. Okay, it has the mucosa, muscularis, and the adventitia. The inner layers, the mucosa, is going to be lined by pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. That cilia is going to help propel the sperm, right, in the proper direction, away from the testes, towards the penis there. Right, then the middle layer is a muscular layer, the middle muscularis. We have 3 layers of smooth muscle, inner, middle, and outer. Right, this will also help to assist the sperm to move through the ductus deferens, and then the outer layer is the adventitia. So here's where the the ductus deferens, right, is going to meet up, right, with the seminal vesicle here. So this structure we're going to talk about here is the ejaculatory duct. Right, it is lined by more, you guessed it, ciliated columnar epithelium, helping to move, right, that sperm, and so towards the urethra here. And so that's exactly what it does. That pseudostratified cilia, all right, is going to move the sperm towards the urethra, and it's going to open up into the part of the urethra called the prostatic urethra. In the male, right, there's 3 parts to the urethra. And so the prostatic urethra is where the ejaculatory duct is going to dump into. All right, so 3 parts to the urethra: the prostatic, the membranous, and the spongy urethra. Obviously, we call the prostatic urethra the part of the urethra that travels through the prostate gland. And then it has to travel through your pelvic floor. And that short, the smallest part of the urethra in males is the membranous urethra. That is going to go through the pelvic floor, or what we call the urogenital diaphragm. And then finally, the longest part of the urethra is going to extend through the male's penis. And so we call it the spongy urethra. So you can kind of see all 3 of those here. Here is the prostatic urethra. Here's the membranous urethra, and then there's the spongy urethra, this long portion. So you can see, here comes, all right, the ductus deferens, the vas deferens, right, coming up through the spermatocord, entering into the male's abdomen, okay, and then it's going to travel along the top superior lateral portion of the urinary bladder. This is a posterior view, by the way. So you can see how it comes down through the backside. We get this swelling here, and there's the ampulla, and then it's going to connect up with the seminal vesicle, and where it meets up with the seminal vesicle, where they both come together, this is called the ejaculatory duct. So remember, semen comes from the testes. Seminal vesicle is going to help produce some of the fluid here for the semen. Did I say semen? Sperm come from the testes, and then that's one component of semen, and then the other part are going to be the fluids that the seminal vesicle will help to produce also. So those 2 meet up here in the ejaculatory duct, which then empties into the prostatic urethra here. So a couple pictures here. All right, here is a slide of the prostate gland. Okay, so we have various glands here that are going to also produce secretions that are going to go enter into semen. All right, here's the ductus deferens, our mucosal lining here, that's pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. You can see how thick the muscularis layer is, right? Does a lot of work, and then our adventitia layers on the outside. And then here throughout the epididymis, you can see all these tubes. These are all cross sections through the tubes. You can see where the sperm at the center and lumen here as they're developing. Okay, so male sexual response. We talked about the female sexual response. The phases of the male sexual response starts off with the excitement phase. This is when the penis becomes engorged. So surrounding the artery at the center here of the penis, here we have our 2 erectile bodies, okay? And this is going to be these small compartments that are going to be located in that tissue around the artery that is going to engorge during the excitement phase as blood fills those spaces. As it does, it leads, all right, the penis to become rigid, therefore it becomes erect, so we call it an erection. All right, as this occurs, all right, the veins now, which are going to drain blood away from the penis, well, excuse me, as the the penis is become engorged here with blood, all right, it compresses those veins so they can't drain the blood away from the penis. So it's able to maintain its erection here. And so once the excitement phase is over, then we'll be able to drain the blood. So we learned back in chapter 15 that the autonomic nervous system, the two divisions, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, all right, will usually have antagonistic effects, and sometimes they'll have cooperative effects. Well, the male sexual response is a cooperative effect in which both parasympathetic and sympathetic are going to work towards a common goal cause, which is ejaculation. So the parasympathetic nervous system is going to cause the release of nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a powerful vasodilator, and so it will therefore increase blood flow and help contribute to the penis erection here. So we'll also see at the excitement phase, because now we're going to be dealing with fight or flight, sympathetic nervous system. So here we're going to stimulate an increase in the heart rate. We'll get an increase in blood pressure and also an increase in respiration. These are all part of the sympathetic nervous system. All right, then the next phase after the excitement phase is orgasm. Okay, so the male reaches climax. Okay, and during this phase, intense pleasure is going on. All right, and then the release of the semen, all right, through the process of ejaculation here. And so during this time, all right, the ductus deferens is going to be moving that sperm, all right, towards the urethra and out of the penis there. Right, and this is where we're going to see, all right, sperm and the seminal fluids that come from seminal vesicle, that comes from the prostate, all of that is going to be released. At this time, all right, which is really clever, all right, the internal urethral sphincter is going to contract, and that prevents backflow. Okay, we don't want one, sperm to go in the wrong direction, but also we don't want urine getting mixed into that. Right, so it prevents urine from entering into the urethra. So at the end of this stage here is ejaculation, and then that's when the semen, all right, is expelled from the penis, all right, and it is going to occur through the autonomic nervous system's division, the sympathetic division. Okay, so we have a saying, right, when it comes to the male sexual response, all right, when we're talking about the autonomic nervous system, point and shoot. Point is the parasympathetic nervous system. As I just mentioned in the previous slide, the parasympathetic nervous system is going to help with erection, okay? And then shoot is going to be the sympathetic nervous system. That is going to be responsible for the ejaculation of the semen. All right, then the final phase is the resolution phase. This is when everything, what goes up must come down sort of thing. And so this is where we're going to see the relaxation point here. All right, so as a result, we're also going to still be utilizing the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. And so it is going to undergo, all right, vasoconstriction of that central artery in the penis there. And so that will decrease blood flow. And so that will then allow blood to leave the penis here. And at the same time, we're going to see contraction of some of the muscles around the erectile tissue there. And so now we can return the penis back to its soft and flaccid state. And then following the male sexual response, we have what's known as the refractory period. And this is when the male is unable to get an erection. And this can last for minutes to hours. It gets longer and longer as the male ages. All right, and then our last slide here, when we're discussing this term here, male climacteric, right? This has to do, right, with men as we get older, right, our testosterone levels start to fall off, right? So that is because we have fewer interstitial cells to help produce the androgens there, right? And so we will see, right, this decrease in testosterone production, all right, has a tendency to be more gradual than what we see with women, all right, with their decreased production of estrogen and progesterone. So men's will decline at a more gradual rate, whereas women's will drop off much more sharply here. So men will definitely have fewer symptoms, but they can still have decreased sex drive is one of the more common ones, mood swings, and even men can get hot flashes, right? Also, we'll see with males here as they get older, the prostate can enlarge. And so this has issues for most men because it can lead to, all right, sexual and urinary dysfunction. And so that also has an issue when males are trying to perform either or of those. And as men get older too, they'll have more difficulty trying to maintain and achieve erections, right? Again, mainly because of age, but there are other issues that can play that role, psychological issues, pharmaceutical issues, some drugs can do this to men and cause them to be impotent. So that's pretty much it for the male reproductive system. I hope you enjoyed this video. This concludes all the material on the reproductive chapter. All right, folks, have a wonderful day and enjoy your day and week.